Welcome to the Directors UK podcast. We're the professional association for UK film and TV directors. No matter the format, no matter the genre, our featured directors share their approach to the craft. We hope you enjoy.
Tonight we have in conversation Brady Corbet with Sam Mendes on The Brutalist.
Thank you for coming. I saw it about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and it stayed with me. And like all the best movies, it's grown in my memory since I saw it. This strange, haunting, beautiful, disturbing, magnificent film. And we have a total delight, which is that we get to ask Brady some really nerdy questions about how you, amongst directors, or people who want to be directors, or people who are directors, how you make a movie like this for less than $10 million in less than 30 days seems to me a movie of such ambition, formal ambition, and it's kind of amazing. But one of the things that I think is like most interesting about directors, right, is that we don't, on the whole, get to see other directors' work in person. Right? I've always felt it's a little bit like when you get to meet other directors, a little bit like how I imagine Alcoholics Anonymous is, right? Because you think you suffer on your own, and then you get together and you're like, oh my God, you go through that too. So
yeah, totally.
But here is a person who has seen, before he was a director, saw many, many more directors working than I will ever see.
Sam, you just a little bit louder.
Louder? Oh wow, that's the first. Nobody's done, Dad, shut up. So I want to start by saying, of all the directors you watched, and you know, you were an actor, and then at a certain point you decided to be a director. What were the more extraordinary experiences, and what were the things that led you to make that decision?
Well, I was always making films from a young age. I made many short films and music videos and stuff since the age of about 10, actually, and I was very fortunate because when I started, started making, more serious, even more serious short form stuff, but more ambitious stuff that I had to raise money for, what have you. I had access to, many extraordinary people that I had worked with. And so I started off with a real advantage. When I was 17, Darius Kanji shot my short films, and I worked with a lot of Leslie Schatz, an extraordinary sound designer, was Gus Van Sant's sound designer for years, and worked on all of those projects. But I think that, I worked with a really wide variety of filmmakers. I worked with Michael Haneke and Lars von Trier and Mia Hansen-Løve and Olivier Assayas and Bertrand Bonello and many, many very accomplished filmmakers. And I think people often ask me, what I learned or what I gleaned from those experiences, and I think that I was working with people that I, of course, really admired, but I saw them struggling, and so when I was struggling, I felt not so ashamed. I felt not so ashamed to ask for help or ask for support, and Even these folks, like Michael especially, who would expect to be this sort of capital M sort of maestro. I saw him having a lot of bad days, and I saw him in situations where he didn't always have the answer. He was exploring. He was trying to find it. And so I think that was very, very helpful, and it's really the only thing that I can point to specifically. That because all of those filmmakers work in such different ways. And I also learned that, because something I sometimes saw with young filmmakers was that they felt like they needed to sort of play a part, when in fact you're really just there to be the first viewer, and to be, you curate, an experience that you hope goes according to plan. but you are mostly just responding to the space and the performer. And you have a grand master plan, but sometimes you have to throw it out, and so I think that it helped me to remain nimble in those situations. And I really struggle specifically with storyboards, and part of the reason I don't do them is because of the fact that I find whenever I've used them that I start trying to recreate this cartoon. Like I get there and I'm like a slave to these drawings. And it's this funny thing where like the light has totally changed, from when we scouted or whatever. And I find that there's always the sequences I've been the most disappointed with, how they turned out in my films were ones that we had planned a little too much, actually. And so there's something to arriving to a place and you go, well, it's supposed to be raining. It no longer is raining. And so, how do we deal with this? And the same with the performance. I try to not sort of smother, folks and say, no, that's all wrong, because maybe it's quite different than how I imagined it, but maybe it's better. It's not always better, but it frequently is better than what you could have, possibly imagined.
And in those moments, there must have been a moment when you thought, I've kind of been planning my directing career since I was young. I'm going to do it now. I'm not going to go back to being an actor or directing as my primary. Was there a moment? Was there a specific moment?
Well, what happened for me specifically was that I started trying to raise money for my first film, which was called The Childhood of a Leader, when I was 21. And every time I would go and work on someone else's movie, I would raise $500,000, and then in the time span of 2 or 3 months that I lost not raising an additional $500,000, I had lost that money. So it was like whack-a-mole. It just I'd solve one problem and then suddenly that other money would disappear. And I realized that there's a momentum that is required to build a movie, and that this film, it took 7 years to build that momentum, but I had to work on it every single day until it eventually snowballed, because essentially you're revving an engine, as you well know, you're striking a match over and over and over again until it ignites. But if you've lost 2 or 3 months, you've lost a year. So I suddenly realized that, if I continue to try to do both, that I'd never get the film made, or it would take me, perhaps a decade, and I wasn't really willing to wait that long.
You mean as opposed to a mere 7 years?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, childhood felt so long to me already, because that took 4 years, and we started rolling on it when I was 25, and we had just had our little girl, and it was that one was already so tough, and it was like a $3.5 million budget. So yeah, I don't know. I think that for me, I realized that I couldn't do both well, and so I just decided, it was a totally psychotic thing to do because we had a child on the way, and I was walking away from, a very modest, but at least, consistent income. And I called everyone and I said, I'm so sorry, I'm not doing this anymore. Because I have to focus on this movie, and you could hear it in their voice, like, oh, that's gonna go great, like an actor in his 20s making a film about the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. It's exactly what people want. But I had to fully commit, and so.
And somewhere in that 7 years of the gestation of this movie, I'm going to go back and ask you about the writing of it, but you nearly made it, right? With a different cast, and a whole different budget and presumably different locations. Totally. And the whole thing. And did you at any point think of that first iteration? How do you think it shifted? Do you think it was healthy for the movie that it changed? Did things change within the film itself? When I heard the cast, I think, well, that's a very different cast. That's a very different energy coming off that project. equally good, but different. And what happened there?
Well, the screenplay never changed. I mean, there were two drafts. There was the first draft, and then we did one more draft about 2 months later, and then it never changed. But the the thing is, as I'm sure many of you know, it's very complicated when you're raising money for a movie, and financiers tend to have a lot of opinions about who has value versus who doesn't. And sometimes they'll be like, well, that person with that in that combination, like somebody, it's not even necessarily just about like that person, but it's what that person means with that person, this plus this. And it's all, some soothsaying bullshit. But it unfortunately, this very, very broken system is the only system that is in place to evaluate the value of a project. And so, when you get a list of names of people that the financiers would approve, you jump at the people that For example, at one point I was doing the film with Joel Edgerton. And Joel is such a brilliant guy, and he's a wonderful human being, and he's a filmmaker. And I knew he'd be a great. I was, because I wanted somebody that I was like, if I can't cast someone who really is the role, I want to cast someone that can disappear into the role. And Joel for me was this kind of unique combination of he's a character actor, but he's also a leading man. Like he's both, and that was really appealing to me. But Joel called me up at one point and was like, I just think that this should be somebody else. And he had lost a bunch of weight and he'd done all sorts of stuff. But I was like, look, I don't disagree, So then we were like, well, maybe you could do this other role and whatever. And then it was a combination of schedules and things that didn't really, align. But we couldn't have left things on better terms. He and I are very close friends. And so, but the thing was that, I kept saying for quite some time, Adrian Brody is this guy. Like he just is this guy. He's the right age, he's the right cultural heritage. And I had met him in 2019. We really connected. And I was just like, everyone's clearly looking a gift horse in the mouth. Like this is insane. Like let's and so it at that point I sort of got in touch with the powers that be and was like for so many reasons this is the right choice. And I mean we're talking about an actor of note that is Hungarian, and Hungarian is like the most insanely difficult name. It's like more difficult than Cantonese. Like it's fucking insane. And so he had grown up speaking it in the house with his family, and I just knew that if he did it, he wasn't going to end up sounding like Bela Lugosi. And so I was just very fortunate that he wanted to do it, because I did feel that if he didn't want to do it, that then I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, wait for someone else to age into the role. Like you've been there. It's a terrible feeling when you're like, I'm fully out of options. This is the last best choice.
Yeah, the bankable name list is a terrible thing. My only story about that is I did a movie called Road to Perdition. This is years ago, and I found this young actor. And I wanted to take it to the studio, and they were like, "Well, who is it?" And I said, "His name is Daniel Craig." And they went, "Meaningless, absolutely meaningless." They said, and that's it.
Totally.
It's just like, well, when do you give him a chance? But the writing of it. To go back, just one thing is like one of the things I spent a little time. We were both sitting on juries in Venice. I don't know, 5-6 years ago, yeah. And I watched you and Mona operating as a pair, as a duo. Very moving to watch you in tandem the whole time. I'm fascinated in how you write as a pair and what your routine is, and how you sit down to write, because it's not just this, which is obviously an extraordinary screenplay, but it's many other things that you've made and things that other people have made. I mean, you worked as working writers for hire. How do you do it? And do you always need to be in touch with each other? Do you sometimes go off into a corner, do your own thing, bring it back? How do you
totally? I think that we're not at all We're not at all dogmatic. I like to work very late at night. She likes to work in the morning. Sometimes I'll sketch something out. She'll work on it for a little while, and we always save a version or a draft of what the other person have been working on. But we try our best to be additive, and it's kind of the first rule of improv. Like, you always say yes and. So as opposed to shutting down one another's initial instincts, we really try to lean into them. And but what's also interesting is that when we're writing a film for one another, we are writing a film for that person to helm. And so, we don't really argue about anything, because if she doesn't like something I've done and she's making the movie, I'm like, it's your movie. I mean, that's the thing. It's so that I really believe that the only way that a set properly functions is like the buck has to stop somewhere. And therefore, of course, in my not so humble opinion, it stops with the director. And I work for people all the time, and I like it. I like to shoot second unit for directors. I enjoy it. I mean, John Hillcoat told me he's doing Blood Meridian. I was like, oh my God, I want to come. I was like, I want to come shoot fucking second unit for you. Like, that just sounds like a blast. And I really mean it. Like, I think that it's not because directors are never wrong. They are frequently wrong. However, there is a continuity of vision which keeps it from becoming an exquisite corpse, where you have the fucking body of a mermaid and the face of a dolphin. Like, you need if you think about, like, someone's coming into your kitchen. Let's think about the holidays. Like, put yourself in a filmmaker's position. Someone comes into the kitchen, and, like, they start fucking, like, adding salt and shit. And you're like, whoa. Hold on. What the fuck are you doing? Like, that's insane. Like, I've been working on this thing for days. It's like, I'm going to be finishing salt, like, what, that's the whole idea. So it's a bit like that. And I think that, somewhere along the way, in America especially, directors started to be treated in this way, like you're just servicing a job, and then when you're being treated that way on a film that you wrote, you raised money for, and you're the only person who knows it inside out. What gives anyone else the authority to say otherwise, especially when you're working at a relatively modest budget level? And I spoke to Christine Vachon, a producer I've worked with a lot, and I asked her, I said, Christine, filmmakers love working with you, and I know you never interfere in a cut. And I was like, I know she's got very strong opinions about stuff, so I was like, why? What is it that keeps it? And she was like, Brady, she was like, let's say that I, in my opinion, make a movie 3 to 5% better. It doesn't change the life or trajectory of the movie. And she was like, in the long run, she was like, the filmmaker just ends up fucking hating my guts. And so it's actually, she was like, and she really understands that we don't have films without filmmakers, and filmmakers have the most to lose. That's the other thing, everyone else, they've got other projects, they've got things they're moving on to, and you kind of live or die by that risk that you're taking. And I was told over and over again that because of the length of this film and stuff, that I was, like, it was like suicide, like career suicide. And I was like, well, I just, I disagree. I fucking disagree. And I was reasonable about it and patient and stuff, but I was like, it's not yours. It's just not yours. I'm so sorry. Like, you know what? If you want it to be yours, then you write a fucking movie, you fucking produce a movie, you direct a fucking movie, and then it's yours. And
I think that deserves a round of applause. I'm sorry. It's refreshing to hear.
I feel like I should be asking you questions, Sam. I'm embarrassed at how one-sided this is, because you're such an amazing filmmaker. So I'm a little embarrassed.
Okay, so we're all, bless you, but we're all turning up to your set on the first day or the 10th day or 20th day, whatever. What kind of director are you on set? Where does your energy go? Are you on your feet the whole time? Are you, here you are shooting on not only film but VistaVision, a lot of it. You have a tiny schedule. You don't storyboard. You've got all this stuff, so you can't like communicate in any other way than to be up and describe it. You the first there. Are you talking all the time? What are your rhythms on set, and what's your energy?
It's a good question. I mean, I was so incredibly sick the first week of shooting on this, and it was really hard for me because I was on an IV and I had no voice, and so I had to write everything down.
Just because it wasn't difficult enough already.
Yeah, my poor assistant, she carried around my blood bag, and every single time it would like drop below my head, like she had it on a clothes hanger, and it would just start filling up with blood. It was like no. But gravity. So you know, I realized actually not having a voice. And look, I'm notoriously long-winded, and I mean, obviously, the movie's 3.5 hours long. But it was really hard for me to not be able to speak because I just realized, like, and it was kind of really chaotic. Like, people were starting to set up in the wrong place. And it was like when you don't have a voice, I mean, it's I honestly, at a certain point, I was like, it might be easier to do this blind. Like, this is really a nightmare. And so, you know, the first few days were really tough. The reason that I was so sick is that, you know, when you, on an independent movie, you're typically closing financing in the first week of shooting. And anyone that's been through that, it's just hell on earth. You suddenly are like a hippo standing on a beach ball, you know, with like holding a chopstick with like a fine china on it, and you're just trying to like balance so many, and everyone's got an opinion, and you know, it is the perfect moment for a head of department or a cast member that has cold feet to just abandon you. And you're just begging everyone. You're like, please, it's like, well, it seems like maybe there's a problem with the money. I'm like, there's always problems with the money. Like, of course, like, you know, the movies are very fragile. Independent films are so fragile. And I'm like, it's fine. Don't worry. The money's coming. The money's coming. But you really, you know, you feel like, like it's like killing of a Chinese bookie. You're running around, like losing your fucking mind. And so I was so ill because everyone kept trying to shut us down, and the movie had already fallen apart like 4 times, and then, you know, I was up all night because the unions were trying to shut us down, and I was just like, can somebody please like give me a break for like 5 minutes? And so I didn't sleep the night before shooting, and then it was just, I woke up and I, you know, from a 15-minute nap in the car, and I was like, oh my God, I have pneumonia. So it was really tough, and people had schedules. They had to get to other movies and stuff, and I had to deal with it. I wasn't allowed to be sick.
And so when you got better, was there a day? Because obviously that you're up against so many different things, but was there a day when you thought? I very rarely have I experienced on Saturday when I feel like I'm in the zone, you know, I'm in a flow state, I'm flying, I'm not really fully conscious of what I'm doing, and yet I'm operating on instinct, but everything's prepared, everyone's working at the right level. Did you feel that at any point? Was it always reaching, or were you always running?
I was very lucky on this movie, mostly because the cast was so supportive. Like, they were very reverent about the material, and they were very grateful to be making the movie. And a lot of them had been attached to the movie for many years. And so, you know, I definitely wasn't, after the first few days when I got my voice back, it wasn't a chaotic set. And also we encourage everyone to bring their children. We always bring our daughter everywhere. And, you know, we want it to be a nice experience. I mean, even if the films themselves can be challenging and disturbing and disruptive and all sorts of things, but, you know, it should be a nice thing to make a movie. It's a great privilege to make a movie, even though it's so difficult. And so, you know, actually everybody was just, you know, I wasn't. When I was shooting, I didn't feel like Sisyphus. Like, at that point, I felt okay. I felt like everyone was really trying to help support also what was on the page, because every shot is sort of described. We have a sort of a format where in the screenplays it's like ultra bode lens on, and, you know, like close on, and there's sometimes parentheticals with, you know, this is a 12 mil, this is an 8 mil, this is a 40, etc. So that everyone kind of knows.
So you've got
What
that
it is.
as a parallel script, or
It's actually it's in the script wherever it's important. So there are certain scenes where I'm like, I don't know, we'll figure it out when we get there. But there are certain sequences. If there's a long sequence shot, especially, there's always a note about, like this isn't one uninterrupted take until otherwise noted. And it's handheld on, and it's very specific, and that helps the whole team to kind of know what it is. Like I don't know if I could direct someone else's script. But I definitely would have to do some sort of a pass on it if I ever did, just because that's how my team is so accustomed to working that way now. And so it's a little looser than a storyboard, but at least they know, hey, we're shooting this. This is a medium, and they arrive and they set up for that, and I think it's helpful.
Yeah, massively helpful. And it's something, it seems so obvious now you say it, but it's rarely the case that it's written into the script. I think it's and so collaborators. Let's talk a little bit about cinematographer and where that relationship began and how you communicated with him.
My cinematographer, Lowell Crawley, and I have worked together for a decade. This is our third film together. We've shot all of the films on celluloid. This is the first film that we shot on a large format. And we'd wanted to work with a large format for a long, long time. And this was the first time that we had enough support from my fellow producers on the project to really, ensure that would happen. Because, you can always, for me, I don't have a problem, hitting a number, but like, I just don't want to be told how to move sand around in the box. So for me, there are certain pillars of a project. And for example, I was like, why don't we just kill a couple of days of principal photography? I think it's worth it to shoot on this large format camera, and that essentially pays for it. But I've worked on projects where I've made those sacrifices and a line producer takes it as a savings and gives me nothing in return. and that I find really, really frustrating. But over the years, I've finally built a team of people that are really devoted. And, my line producer on this project, he's amazing because, he communicates like a banker. But, he really is an artist and he loves cinema. And when somebody does that job well, it is extraordinary. Like, you hold on to them for dear life because it is one of the most thankless and difficult jobs. Everybody hates your guts all the time. So I was just really lucky with this particular team. And my cinematographer, Lowell, and I, there were a lot of things that we wanted to, for example, the sex scene was shot in this very unusual way where there was a film a long time ago that John Matheson shot that Daniel Craig starred in about Francis Bacon. And they didn't have the rights to Bacon's work. And, with all the popes and stuff, all the cardinals rather, that you have that effect of these kind of streaming highlights that are sort of what Bacon was famous for. So they figured out a way to achieve these streaming highlights in a totally analog way, which is that if you put a 435 into service mode, which is also, it's kind of funny because you can't look through the eyepiece. So once you start rolling, you can't see what it is that you're shooting. But the effect is that it just streams all of the highlights into one image because the aperture never closes. I had really wanted to use this technique for the sex scenes because I was like, I wanted to have this sort of transcendent quality, where it's almost like an aura cam or something like this. The spirit's like jumping out of the body. And so Lowell was like, well, I'll get in touch with the guy that did it, 30 years ago. This guy's name is Lester Dunton. He's Joe Dunton's son, who was famous for making Kubrick's lenses. And we fly Lester over from Los Angeles. We shoot with it on day one. We get to the lab. There's nothing on the negative. So then this thing that everybody was already highly suspicious of, the production team was like, they're like, okay, well, that didn't work. So now we have to reshoot it. And I was like, yeah, it's going to work next time. The second time we shoot it, it doesn't work. It doesn't work either. And so we finally get someone else to come in and help us sort of, figure it out. And finally, I sent my wife to shoot the sex scene, and she has a background in choreography and dance, so she was really the right person to do that anyway, because we had to do it with models, because you couldn't ask an actor to hold these positions for 7 hours or something, and so it was more like modeling, and so eventually it worked out, and I think it's such a beautiful effect, but it is sometimes a process of trial and error, and it's just so great to work with a cinematographer like Lowell, who, he and I are very similar in a way. We love, antiquity as much as we love modernity. Like, we love analog techniques, but the end of the movie shot on digibeta. Like, we really try to play with the form. And no, he's just an extraordinary cinematographer, and if any of you have the chance to work with him, I highly recommend him. Yeah.
And you fought off all the naysayers in pre-production, and then you make your film. Who are you showing it to? How do they respond? And did you have battles to fight once you'd made it?
Yeah, I did. I did. And all of us have since made up. So I won't throw anyone under the bus. But yeah, it was, people were operating from a place of fear as opposed to a place of power. I understand it's stressful. People are worried about losing their jobs. That's really all it comes down to. But the thing is that at the end of the day, what's interesting about this was that everyone appreciated the movie, and the first time they saw it, actually, but they would kind of go against their initial instincts, but their own personal instincts. And I understand it. I'm being a little, punk ass bitch about it, but I do understand, actually. And I try to empathize with people that, vehemently disagree with me. But the thing is that I care more about my movie than I care about anyone's feelings. And I think that it's very complicated because I don't like being in conflict, but making a film is being in conflict. It just is. And it's a strange thing because you're like, I don't know, I think I'm a pretty reasonable, nice guy. But if someone is like pushing your kid around in the schoolyard, of course, you're going to have something to say about it. It provokes something in you. And my job is to protect the flame of the project. I've made promises to my heads of department, to my performers, to everyone. I've said, I promise you that no matter what, no matter who tries to push me around, that I am never, ever going to defer to them.
I would imagine there were certain areas of the movie that exercised you more in post than others. There are areas that fly by and they're like, the first cut's pretty much how it ended up. And then there are areas that are trickier. What were the things that challenged you the most, the specific areas of the movie?
I have a hard time. One thing that, like, my next movie, there's a lot less dialogue in it, and part of that is because I start to lose perspective when I'm working on a scene with a lot of text. That just comes from, if you say like spoon, 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 spoon over and over again, suddenly it ceases to really mean anything. And so when you've heard a line of dialogue 100 times, you start to kind of lose that visceral response that you have in the moment. So, for example, the long, Christmas monologue sequence with Guy and Adrian, I was cutting that for months. Like, it's funny because there were very small changes, but it really affected the hypnotic rhythm. It was like, I was like, oh, now suddenly it's out of balance and it just feels indulgent. But when it was in balance, it was hypnotic and you're kind of hanging on every word. And so, that was a tricky one for me. But the very visceral sequences, those ones you always get that rush. So You know, it's like the opening credits of the bus and stuff. You're like, oh, that works. Like I know that works, but the other stuff that's harder to maintain your perspective. So I bring people in that I trust, and you know, I also because most of my films have sequences with my first film had a lot of dialogue that was in French, and this of course had a lot of dialogue in Hungarian. So I bring in filmmakers that I trust that are native speakers to help me dialogue edit, and because I hate when I watch a film and you're like, this person clearly doesn't speak the language, and it's painful because you're like, this is great. Like, I'm sure it sounds amazing in Cantonese, but it's just, there's something missing. And so I try to bring in folks that, have that perspective. And, it's funny because I'm talking about how the buck stops with the filmmaker and all these things, but I actually also, it is a collaboration, and I rely on my collaborators. So these things are both true. It's funny. You have to know like when to invite those opinions, and you have to also know when to take them with a grain of salt. And you can't please everybody. Everybody has a different internal rhythm. Mine is very slow.
I'm going to throw it over to you guys in a minute, but I just want you to just you're on this peculiar and slightly disturbing journey, which is the release of a movie during award season and the various events you have to attend and what have you. But you did tell us a story about your daughter at the Golden Globes. I think you should perhaps communicate here because it's really touching.
Well, my daughter has been extremely patient with my wife and I as we've made 2 films back to back. And part of the reason I'm so exhausted and losing my voice and all this stuff is because, I was in post-production on The Brutalist for 2 years and all throughout the entire summer. But I was also shooting second unit for my wife for a musical that we wrote. And so we had my daughter, we had to leave a lot, and we promised her after the film premiered in Venice that we'd have a break. And then, of course, because the film's release date was set for the end of the year in the U.S., it was just ramping up. And so we kept having to leave her a lot. And she's 10 years old, so she has, feelings about this now. And at the Golden Globes, she started crying. And when the film won a prize, and I was so moved by it because I was like, oh, my God, she never emotes like that. And she's kind of stoic even. And I was like, that's so moving. She's like tears of joy. It was amazing. But then when I got back to the table and I was like, hey, are you okay? And she was like, I'm just so happy it's finally over. And then we had to explain to her that this was the first award ceremony of the year, and that there were perhaps more that we would be asked to attend, and she was just like, oh, make it stop. So yeah, it's complicated have doing this job when you have kids, as you well know.
For your sake, it keeps going. For her sake, perhaps not. Listen, I'm sure people here have questions and things they're eager to ask you. Yeah.
You obviously wrote the script originally quite a long time ago. How do you keep it kind of fresh for you over such a long period of time, particularly if it falls apart a few times and you try not to get too demoralised by that? How do you kind of, firstly, remain optimistic, and secondly, remain excited about the material?
I think new iterations of the cast, new shooting locations, things just sort of reignite it for you. But I totally had very long periods where I was down on myself and down on it, and I couldn't help it. I started to resent the project because it was like ruining my life, but then something gives you a little hope, and you latch onto that for dear life, and that's all. I also think the most important thing for me is working with material that will never not be relevant, which is to say that the themes and everything, that the film is dealing with, it has to be something that will matter as much to you in a decade as it does when you first conceive of it. I had a conversation with Denis Villeneuve, who is an incredibly generous and sweet guy, obviously a great filmmaker, but a really sweet person. And I was like, making a movie, it's a marriage. It's not a one night stand, And he was like, "It's a tattoo on your fucking face." and I was like, or that. And he's so right. It's like, I mean, people bring shit up to me that like a voiceover that I did 27 years ago, and I'm like, Jesus, these things just never go away. Like, in New York, we do skeletons in the closet screenings with all of our friends that make stuff, and like everyone has to bring over whatever they're the most embarrassed of. I highly recommend it. Very, very cathartic. But I think that operating under the assumption that of Denise that you have a tattoo on your face when you make a movie, you want to make sure that it's at least it has the ambition to have been a good tattoo. Like, it's like, I want to be able to explain why I did it, at the very, very least. And I always encourage performers. I'm like, hey, like, they'll be like, I don't know about the script, but it's a great filmmaker. I'm like, well, go work with it. I mean, like, you'll always be able to say, yeah, but it's like, I wanted to work with this person. I understand that. I just want to be able to tell people, well, this is what I was experimenting with, and every film to some extent is an experiment. And I don't like to play it too safe, because then, it's a risk reward thing. It's like you want to take a big swing, and there's a lot of ways to take a big swing. You can take a big swing by doing a big studio movie that no one would expect you to do, or a children's film that no one would expect you to do. Well, there's a lot of different ways to be ambitious. And so, I don't know. I think the most important thing is just choosing material that you think you might still care about, and when you're in another phase of your life.
I'm really interested to know, once hearing how much it cost and seeing it and how epic and huge it looked, on what sort of like it all looked like you did everything on location. It didn't look like there was any VFX. It just looked. I just don't know how you did it. It's quite a. I don't know how you would answer this question, but like, I just don't know how, having seen it and hearing how much it costs, like, even when you're like, how much were on sets, or like, it just all looked like location and the builds you do in it as well.
Well, there's a couple of things. The building is a combination of techniques. For example, we built about 8% of it, and then we digitally extended the rear of the building. So you had real light, real shadow, real texture, real scale. And so you had something that everyone was latching onto that they're just simply duplicating. We also used very large scale practical models, like Star Wars style. We did, we just sort of, we did things as sensibly as we could. I mean, I think there's a lot of visual effects that try to show you that they're a visual effect, which for me is anti-intuitive. So it also has to do with how you're treating it in the grade. So much of this was done in a very analog way. Film grain also helps to really marry a lot of visual effects to picture. There's a lot of different techniques. But, I always just look at movies like Metropolis or, The Crowd or films from the 20s and early 30s and stuff where, they're hugely ambitious. They're so much more ambitious than like 99.9% of the films that we see every year. And they figured it out. And I mean, I remember one time I only had 40 extras, and we put up a mirror and we turned them into 80, and it's cheaper than a visual effect where you're doing the exact same thing. So it's funny. They're cheap tricks, but they work. And there's also something. They're real, and that realness, I think, helps ground them. yeah, and then other than that, as much as I would have loved to have sets that were 180 degrees all the time, or sorry, 360 rather, we couldn't afford to do that. So we would do either the floor or the ceiling, but usually not both. So there's a ton of things that I did with visual effects later on where we could only afford one painting. So I was like, okay, we'll hang 5 paintings in the background with visual effects. Like, especially visual effects that you wouldn't expect to be visual effects are very, those really work. I think when the eye starts to struggle is if you're looking for it, and then anything a little bit wrong, it just throws the eye completely. So yeah, and also the last thing is that every scene is a maximum of 3 setups. It's usually 1 or 2, and so that allowed us to shoot very quickly. So we do a lot of takes. We actually do a lot of takes. Like we do 20 to 25 takes pretty regularly. But then when you're done, you're actually done. And then my wife was shooting second unit and was, doing all of the details and stuff. And it was a mix of formats. We used 16 millimeter. We used 3perf 35, and then VistaVision, whenever it felt appropriate.
Fantastic.
It is an extraordinary movie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The scene where he first gets off the train and meets his brother, and his performance is so brilliant because you feel the years and years of pain that he's endured, and he suddenly breaks down and cries. So I just wondered if you could talk a bit about working with actors of such high caliber, because I was wondering, did he have to do that many times over and over, or did he get that in the first take and have preparation? It's, when you've got such brilliant actors, how would you guide them? What kind of notes do you give?
I think a lot of it, once again, is in the screenplay. I think that scene in particular is like, lets out an emotionally cathartic wail, and which can only be interpreted one way. So it's a little bit like, as a performer for many years, I either wanted total freedom or I wanted to be told exactly what to do. Because it made me feel safe. It made me feel oriented. And I didn't like the kind of betwixt and between thing. That was the only thing where I'd be like, you have very strong opinions about certain things, but you have no opinions about the rest. And I just never knew what to do. I never knew quite what to do. But the scripts are so specific. And I also just was lucky. I had a cast that really, really paid attention, and they were really devoted. And actors are amazing. One of the reasons I also quit was that I was fine, but I wasn't capable of what some of these incredibly technical performers were capable of. And I just felt totally fraudulent. So it wasn't that hard for me to leave behind, because I was like, I did some good work with some good people and stuff, but I couldn't do what Adrian does, or Alessandro, or Joe. Joe, if you close his eyes, he sounds exactly like Joseph Cotton. It's crazy. Like, it's such a technical performance. And so I just got lucky. But you usually get lucky. Most people over deliver, not under.
Mm-hmm. And with the sort of 20-25 takes, was that usually technical reasons then, or were you trying to?
I always move on if I think I have it, but I just the choreography. A lot of it is something like, it's like out of a movie like Rope or something, where there's a very, very specific way that they're sort of trading sizes and lenses, and it just takes a little while to get right, and I would just I don't do it. I never do it just to do it. But I also want the performers to know that they start trying things out, and they feel free when they know that they get another one. People start playing it very, very safe when they're like, oh, I only have 2. But everybody has a different philosophy about it. I've worked with people who just 2 takes, that's it. And that was kind of interesting too. It just depends. You just have to have a lot of courage to operate that way.
Gentlemen.
I'd love to hear more about the shooting schedule and the amount of days you were able to achieve this in. Was it more to do with the fact that, I mean, obviously there's immense and very effective shot economy, but do you rehearse extensively with the actors? I mean, how are you able to achieve that without compromising creativity?
I'm not usually afforded that just for financial reasons. I would like to have a little more time in the future, just a little bit more. But in general, you know, we rehearsed a few key scenes. I would once again say, like, the pillars of the movie. Like, if this scene doesn't work, the whole movie falls apart. So those things we did rehearse. But for the most part, it was such a big ensemble. We just couldn't get everyone in the same room. And during COVID, there were these crazy buffers on people's schedules. So even if they wrapped on June 1st, they weren't available to you until June 30th. And so that was really hard. And so... yeah, I would always like to have more time, a little bit more time, but it's such a marathon that for me personally, I mean, I can't handle doing it for very long. When I speak to like French filmmaker pals that are like, I'm on day 101. I'm like, what are you doing? That's insane. I don't know how they have the stamina. I mean, it's such a, I don't know. Maybe they're doing it differently. I don't know. But for me, it's just such a marathon. I want to get it over with as soon as possible.
How long was the script? How many pages?
It's 170 pages.
And how many days?
It was 33 days. It was 33 days, and
That seems pretty.
yeah, I mean, we had days where we did more than 10 pages, but I always try to balance it with, like, okay, there's a lot of dialogue, but cinematographically speaking, it's very simple. So we would set up 2 cameras and we would shoot it, the way you actually shoot a lot of romantic comedies or something. You shoot it very simply.
So how often did you shoot 2 cameras?
I think probably 4 times in the movie. Yeah, but for long ones, like for the monologue Christmas party, for the diner scene. And I happen to really like these kind of low, medium frames that allow us to do that. But in general, I hate shooting with 2 cameras. If you're operating at all, it's just like both shots are compromised. But there is this one place that I think it really evokes a style of filmmaking from the 1950s. And so for those scenes, it works. But trying to explain to the powers that be that this one sentence can take 3 days to shoot, but this 10-page scene can be done in 4 hours. If actors are prepared and whatever, that's a hard thing to explain to someone, because what takes time is a lot of setups. I mean, you lose time trying to find a frame and relighting and stuff. And so we spend a lot of time lighting, but when we're done lighting, then we're done. And so minimal coverage sort of allows you to do that.
Congratulations on the film. I was just wondering what you were talking about now. Did you have rehearsal time before principal photography began, or you just went on set and then you did
Only a few scenes. Like when Felicity flew in for costumes, we rehearsed her confrontation of Guy and the family. Also, there was a stunt in the middle of it, and it was one shot, and so that we rehearsed. There were a few, but for the most part, we really couldn't. But there were a couple things I reshot. Actually, I mean, there were a couple things that didn't go according to plan, and there's originally in the jazz club there was a big scene where Adrian got thrown out of that club, and it was day one. I didn't have my voice, and there was jazz music playing, and it just the footage was just awful, and so I reconceived of how to do it in a very cheap way. And finally, it was just that long lens shot of him getting thrown out. That was, we did in about 45 minutes.
A couple more. Towards the back there. I'm bringing all the people right at the back. Gentlemen there. Yes, you.
Hello. First of all, thank you for the honesty and openness you've brought into this conversation today. I was wondering about the mental headspace, if I can call it that, when you approach film and how you're able to understand what is correct in the moment, and that directorial intuition that you inhabit that is evident within the film that you have made. Are there any things that you adhere to during the preparation and the process of filming as such? What is your way of kind of keeping yourself together and allowing yourself to be the person you want to be?
Hey, you should ask my wife. I'm not together. I have tried to get better at taking care of myself. I do a lot of yoga. I try to drink less when I'm shooting. I try to be good to myself as much as possible because it's so miserable to be sick on set. But I don't know. It's sort of like cinema is a language, and it's funny because, filmmakers, they all have their own approach and signature, but it's a language, and I think that some people are fluent in that language, and some are less fluent in that language, and so I think you just have to trust that you know when you know, and if you're a film viewer, if you're a film goer, then the only next step is communication. So if you could, if you watch a movie and you know what to say about it, then you know what to say about the footage that you're watching on the day too, and you go, and usually you're working with people who are. They're overqualified, and so it's really just conducting. It's like a little more here, a little less there, and let's try it again. And but yeah, it's filmmaker's not the right word. Film worker is the right term. It's a much more blue collar profession than a lot of people make it out to be. It's labor intensive. It's physically demanding. It's very, very challenging. And so I just try to take care of everybody, and I try to take care of myself. And on weekends we cook for everyone, and everyone comes over, and we just like it to be nice. I mean, we want people to want to come to work. I have stopped getting excited about the shiniest object in the room. There's something that happens when you're a young filmmaker and some fancy person, wants to work with you or whatever. But then if you get that feeling like, I don't know, this feels like, and then you should really trust your gut on that. Work with people who want to be there and who are grateful to be there, because it is such a privilege. And, I just think that's really important. I don't believe in kissing the ring. I don't care who it is. It's not healthy for the environment. And if I ever get any warning signs, I go, you know what? Might take 3 or 4 months to recast or whatever, but I want to work with somebody who actually wants to be there and isn't just doing it because they think that they should for some reason.
I think we'll call it a day. I've got to say, I thought that was extraordinarily inspiring. Great, Brady, I really did. And the highest.
Well, thank you for doing this. Sam, your work's amazing, and I'm so grateful that you of all people would agree to do this. Thank you so much.
No, it's a total pleasure. Thank you so much.
This podcast was recorded at a Directors UK member event. You can hear plenty more directors in conversation by subscribing on the usual streaming platforms. Follow us on social media and find out more about us at directors.uk.com.